Welcome to the Grazing Grass Podcast, episode 87.
I think the biggest thing for me, there's a lot of good information out there in the world, but make sure you apply it in your context.
You're listening to the Grazing Grass Podcast, helping grass farmers learn from grass farmers. And every episode features a grass farmer and their operation. I'm your host, Cal Hardage. You're growing more than grass. You're growing a healthier ecosystem to help your cattle thrive in their environment. You're growing your livelihood by increasing your carrying capacity and reducing your operating costs. You're growing stronger communities and a legacy to last generations. The grazing management decisions you make today impact everything from the soil beneath your feet to the community all around you. That's why the Noble Research Institute created their Essentials of Regenerative Grazing course to teach ranchers like you easy-to-follow techniques to quickly assess your forage production and infrastructure capacity in order to begin grazing more efficiently. Together, they can help you grow not only a healthier operation, but a legacy that lasts. Learn more on their website at noble.org/grazing. It's noble.org/grazing. Be sure and listen in the upcoming events for grazing courses coming near you. On today's episode, we have Jake DeWoody. He's a regenerative farmer in Arkansas, so not too far from me. Today we talked about his journey getting started using chicken litter, leases, and the Shade Shanty 600. Yes, you definitely want to catch it. Wonderful episode. Before we talk to Jake, 10 seconds about my farm. Well, today we're going to follow the pattern from last week. We're not going to talk about my farm. We're actually going to talk about a past guest on the show. On episode 44, we had Callahan Maynard on. He was just getting started on a few acres. He'd purchased some Aberdeen Angus and with the goals of grass finishing them. Well, I'm excited to announce that he just took those in for processing the other day. It's exciting to see that journey get to this point. And if you happen to be in Northeast Oklahoma and you're looking for a side of beef, he's got some available. Anyway, congratulations, Callahan. I know it's been a long process to get to this point. And with that said, let's talk to Jake. Jake, we want to welcome you to the Grazing Grass Podcast. We're excited you're here today.
Well, I'm terribly excited too and a little anxious. It's been quite the adventure, but I'm ready to give it a go if you are.
Oh, I'm sure it will go wonderfully. To get started, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your operation?
Yep, we are in kind of the southwest corner of Arkansas. Most people know where Hope, Arkansas is from President Bill Clinton. We're about 35 miles from there. So
Oh, yes.
kind of a quiet little corner of the state. There's just not a lot of exciting things that go on, but I was born here locally, kind of been here most of my life. I traveled for about 12 years. I worked basically construction, you could say. And so traveled around the country, saw a lot of country. Growing up, the place that's ours now was my father's. He bought back in the mid 80s from another family member, and he operated it, the whole time I was a kid up until just a few years ago when he passed away. And it was always a small operation, but decent size for our area. We're a lot of really small farms, big guys like 500-600 acres. Most of us are somewhere between 50 and 100. So anyway, grew up kind of in the industry, very conventional. I mean, cows were out most of the time. We just ran a bull year round. When dad needed to get some money together to go buy a tractor or another hay baler or something, we'd round some calves up and carry them to town, which the cows weren't really his thing. He was actually a custom hay guy, and that was his mainstay. The cows were just kind of an accessory to that. So
That's a job I don't want.
I used to hate it as a kid, course, I was the
Oh, yes.
kid, on the open cab tractor when it's 100 degrees
Yes.
and yada, yada, yada,
Yeah. You
and,
gotta start at the rate tractor and work up.
exactly, and, the funny thing is, in my opinion, the rake guy is the most important guy because the baler's gotta follow the rake wherever he goes.
Yes,
Um,
that's true.
so I had a lot of those stern conversations with my dad about, straight lines, how to make the turns, the whole 9 yards, but
Oh, yeah.
so, getting out of high school, I liked farming, but I wasn't into it to the point that I wanted to buy my own place and stuff like that. So I traveled for work for a while, did a few other things. And then right before COVID came, I guess it was about 20, maybe early 2020, my dad had kind of got a little bit, his health had degraded a bit. And he said,
Oh, yeah.
hey, I need some help. I'm not really ready to completely give up everything, but you know, if you want to work around here, I'll keep you some stuff to do, which basically means I'll work you for free, but that's fine. So I got back
Yes,
into it,
I understand that.
got back to doing some hay with him. And I'm like, I kind of miss it. The traveling life it's hard, especially with family. And my
Oh,
wife and I,
yes.
we've got 2 kids. So I was interested in getting back home. So I found a local job, and ended up starting to operate dad's place. Just, a few cows, nothing special, did a little bit of hay. And then for whatever crazy reason in December, it was 2019, me and my partner, now business partner, decided to buy out a 140 head cow calf operation in the middle of winter, which we dove off into it because I had a bunch of extra hay that I hadn't sold that year. And that was fortunate.
Oh, yeah.
So I'll have to say that was one of the hardest things I ever went through was diving. Because I mean, we went from like 40 head max to 140. And
Oh, yeah.
that February, we had one of the heaviest snows that we've gotten in the area in the last 20 years. I mean, it was like 2 feet of snow. And I was just sitting there thinking, of course, that was when all these cows were set to calve, January and
Oh, yes.
February. It was tough, but it was really eye-opening for me. I'm like, okay, you're in recovery mode then, rolling out hay. I'm building shelters for them, put them up on the tree line. I forget what our feed bill ended up being that winter. It was astronomical. I could have bought me a
Oh, I
decent
imagine
pickup
so.
truck. I remember that.
Oh, yeah.
And, from that point, I guess that was when the inclination kind of started that, maybe there's a different way to approach this. But it was just like a little kind of a bug in your ear. I wasn't
Oh,
putting
yeah.
a lot of thought into it. We were just doing the normal grind. We would calf twice a year, once middle of winter, then another in the middle of summer, basically. And we ran our bulls on a 3-3 rotation, is what they call it here. You run them 3 months in, pull them out for 3 months. 3 months after that, you put them back in, just over and over again.
Oh, yes.
So, when you gather calves, you've got everything from, fresh wean to 600 pounders out there. And, that makes it difficult. So that was kind of one of our first things was tightening up that calving schedule. And boy, that helps a lot. That was kind of the second thing that I noticed. And it was really strange to me now to look back. It's like you saw all these signs that what you were doing wasn't working that well. And, now
Right,
it's
yeah.
like reading a billboard. It's like, oh my, you
Oh,
should have done
yes.
this, you should have done that. Your life would have been so much easier, would have saved you a lot of money.
Mhm.
So that was kind of how that progressed. And starting out that winter was actually kind of we lost several calves, and when they were dropping right in
Oh,
two
yeah.
feet of and I think it was the third or fourth one. I called my wife. I said, "Hey," I said, "we got to do something. I can't take, I just can't stand it." And so the next one I found, I put him in the actually still have him. He's our forever steer, I call him, but
Yes.
he's got his own name and everything. But put him in the tractor, warmed him up, brought him home. He actually lived in our bathroom of our house for, I forget, it was almost a week, just trying to get him warmed up and
Oh,
turned
yeah.
around. And we spent an exorbitant amount of money getting this little guy on the right track, but he made it. So we set up a calf barn behind the house where we could take in these ones that were problematic. And that was really what started, because then I had 5 or 6 calves there at a time. So I got some manure and stuff like that building up, and I've got to clean this up. That was what actually started the compost thing. And there's a gal, I
Oh,
actually heard her mentioned the guest that you had that released today. I was listening to your episode earlier, mentioned
Oh,
Dr.
yes.
Elaine Ingham. And she's the real reason that kicked off my, I guess you could call it, regenerative journey. When I
Oh,
started
yes.
studying her work, and, I had these calves there behind the house. We're feeding them, cleaning out the pen, the whole 9 yards. So I built me a compost pile and kind of start working on that. And the first thing I did was I put it in our raised bed garden that spring. Grew some of the most delicious cherry tomatoes I've ever tasted. And I'm like, immediately my first thought is, you got to get this out into the pastures.
Oh, yeah.
So that was kind of how my compost journey started, which it's a lot easier to do in a raised bed garden than it is to do over a 60-acre hay meadow. From Dr. Elaine Ingham's work, my next stop, and I don't remember exactly how I got there, but I got a book written by a gentleman named Charlie Massey. He's an Australian, and I wish I'd have wrote down the name of that book. I don't have it on hand.
Something. Let's see here. I think I've got it right here.
I think it's been mentioned on your podcast before.
It has.
Call of the Reed
and I
Warbler.
cannot.
That's the name of it.
Yes.
And
And I have not read it, but it's been mentioned a few times, and it's on one of those to read lists,
Yep.
but I haven't got to it.
it's a good read. I enjoyed it. And part of that book goes through stories of people that he interviews around Australia. And so after I read it, then I kind of started digging into these other people. Charlie Arnott was one of them. And then I found out he had a podcast.
Oh, yeah.
That was the first one that I really started listening to hard and getting some different ideas, because in my part of the world, the information is pretty stagnant. The local NRCS office, I mean, they talk a little bit about subdividing pastures, and they've got some programs for stuff like that, but that's really about it. And
Oh, yeah.
so I'm a person that when I get interested in something, I'm hungry for information. So I start, I'm listening to the podcast, and then every time they mention a book or something like that, I'll go on Amazon and buy it and read it and dive through it. That really just started, a waterfall of information coming in. And of course, I want to try everything all at once, and that's
Right.
really hard to do. So rolling back to our home farm, that was my dad's place there. The main place is about 60 acres. And I had been using it for basically a big hay meadow, which the ground's a little bit poor for that. It was a cotton farm back in I want to say up to the mid 60s. And then from there, it was pasture on out. And man, that ground is so hard where that old cotton field is. You can still, when you drive from east to west, you can still feel the rows, 50 years later. It's crazy. And being on that piece of land basically my entire life, I noticed our hay crops were going down every year, which, we didn't do hay like, I know some of the guys out west that fertilize and spray. We didn't do all that. We were basically just mixed grass, a lot of Bermuda, Bahia, stuff like that. My dad's thing was, hey, it's good enough for the cows to eat in the summer. It's good enough to roll up, feed it to them in the winter, and keep them out of lick tub or whatever to kind of keep the condition up if you need to. And it did work for the most part, loosely. But anyway, back to the hay crops. I just noticed every year that I was putting up less and less hay. And I got down to the last year before I made any changes out there, we pulled 93 rolls off 60 acres the entire summer, which, as a kid, I remember we pulled 400 rolls. And back then we were running a 5-foot wide baler. So the rolls there's a lot, 20% more hay in there at least. So my first step was there's a guy around the corner that's got a layer of chicken houses. So I started buying the litter from him, just cheaper than fertilizer. And he's like a half a mile down the road, so it didn't cost me a lot to get it put out.
Oh, that's nice.
And because, I should throw this mention in there too. I had the USDA office come out and do some soil samples on the place. And they came out, we set up the grid and pulled all the samples. And the guy calls me, I forget, like a month later. He says, I got all your results back, swing by the office and we'll talk about it. I was like, all right, cool. Sounds great. So, now mind you, this is 60 acres roughly. And so I go by the office, I'm talking to him, I'm looking at it. I'm like, I understand some of this. I understand pH and NP and K, but I don't understand all the other stuff. And he goes through there and he says, well, let's write you up a program and you can take it by the co-op. So he writes me up this fertilizer regimen and lime and everything else. And I didn't notice at the time, but he had this kind of glint in his eye. And he was pretty good at hiding it, but I noticed it afterwards. So I bebop in the co-op and I hand them to him. I said, what will this cost me? And guy punches around on their computer for a few minutes. He said, it'll be about $27,000.
Oh,
And I said, wow, thank you, but no thank you.
right.
I can't do that. I said, I'm pretty sure even if I had the money, I wouldn't. And I don't think the bank will loan it to me. So I go back to the USDA and I'm like, hey, what do I do? He said, well, I knew you'd be back. Find you some layer litter if you can. That'd be your best bet. If not, get whatever litter you can find and put 2 tons of lime per acre on. So that was where I started. I put some lime out, started putting the broiler litter out, and the guy get the layer litter. I said broiler. Apologize for that.
Yes.
But the guy I'm buying it from, he puts it out too, and he says, look, you got to give it 3 years. So, okay, I understand that. Nature works slow. He said, you'll see some benefit, but you got to give it some time. So I never did notice just a huge increase. I mean, the hay crop started creeping up little by little, but last spring, this would have been about 2.5 years after I started the litter. We had a small crop of replacement heifers that we had pulled out of the big herd and needed somewhere to put them. So we put up some more fence around the place and brought that. I think there's 24 of them out there. And naturally, I wanted to try, I've been reading about rotational grazing and all this stuff. So this is my test bed now. So I go buy a bunch of electric fence and all, just all the things. And of course, these gals have never seen an electric fence before. And I had I think it's a Gallagher S100 solar charger, and we had bought it from something previous, but I put it up. I put them kind of in a pen. It was starting spring, so I was still feeding a little bit of hay. The grass hadn't really kicked off yet. And so I split the pen in half with a piece of polywire, an old piece of polywire. It wasn't even new stuff. And they blew through it. Well, this isn't any good. So I put it up again, and I ended up putting up 4 or 5 strands of it on just the plastic co-op T-posts and running that across there. And they kind of respected it, but not really. And I forget what podcast I was listening to, but somebody mentioned the Taylor Cyclops fence chargers. And so I got on the internet. I ordered one. I think it's a 16 or maybe a 12 joule. It's stout. Strong.
I love those Cyclops.
Man, that thing is a tank. I'll tell you another story some other time. It got me. I got a full blast from it about 3 days ago. It's the first time I've ever been hit, completely full contact with the ground with it. And wow.
Yes. Make your funny bone tingle.
Oh, for a while.
Yeah, it will.
So I hooked this Taylor up and I run that hot wire across there. And if you remember back, I was telling you about my forever steer that we saved.
Yes.
He was our first customer to the Taylor Cyclops. And buddy, he told everybody else about it because they were instantaneously broke to a hot wire.
Oh, yeah.
It was just night and day. So I started rotating from that point on out. And it was, I think really what happened, I primed the land with that chicken litter. And
yes,
when I put those heifers across there, of course, I don't really know what I'm doing. So I'm guessing I give them about a day. And I do try to move them every day, especially in the growing season, because if I'm going to try something, I want to give it my best effort.
Oh, yeah.
So we start moving them, every day. And I'm looking at the grass. I'm like, this stuff is, it's exploding under their feet. And of course, now I know that I was going too slow, but I didn't know that at the time.
Oh, yeah.
So,
yeah.
But man, it was really impressive just watching those animals move through there. And just the impact, it's just so fast from that action. And I was, man, there's really something to this stuff. And you keep digging in, you get deeper and deeper and deeper, and then I find all these, because everybody's got an opinion on it. And, some
Oh,
people
yeah.
got one
Yeah.
style, some people got another style. And of course, none of them are really in my type of environment with my type of grass. And so I really didn't know what to do. I just kind of kept moving them every day. And if they griped at me a little too much, I'd give them a little more. And if they were, if I was going out to move them and they were kind of still just laying around and moving up slowly, then I'd tighten them up a little bit. Really saw some good action out of it.
Jumping back to Arkansas, I went to college with a gentleman from DeQueen,
Oh,
Arkansas,
that's not too far.
and we told everyone he was from LA. They'd be like, "From LA?" Yeah. Lower Arkansas.
When I traveled for work, it's funny you mentioned that joke. When I traveled for work, I spent a lot of time out in California. Hey, where are you from? Of course, they notice your accent from a mile away.
Oh, yeah.
And, LA, the area anyway. And they're like, what part? Like, we've never heard anyone that talks like you do. Like, what part of LA? I'm like, kind of the southwest corner. And they're like, what's this guy talking about? I'm like, lower Arkansas.
Right,
And they're like,
yeah.
oh, geez, But it would get them every
Yeah.
time.
Oh, I'm sure. That litter is amazing stuff. We had chicken houses in the late 90s, early 2000s. And that broiler, we had broiler houses. So we spread that litter on my dad's place. And it was dug for coal in I want to say the late 70s. So it was put back, but it wasn't put back nicely.
Right.
They mainly put the subsoil on the top, and it couldn't grow good rocks. We started putting that litter on it, and those poor rocks grew good grass. It was amazing.
It's
Yeah.
it's powerful. The gentleman I actually get my litter from, he clear cut. I want to say it was like 20 acres, and he had him come in and clean it back up, and he put a heavy. I forget how many tons an acre, but it was a lot.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, the next year there's Bermuda grass out there that's like a foot and a half deep. It's
Oh,
just
I
it's
imagine so,
insane.
yeah.
So very very powerful tool.
Yeah. So before we jump back to your heifers and how they're doing on there, you found the book, Reed Wobbler,
Call of the Reed
and
Warbler.
then,
Yep.
yeah. And you started researching that more. Was there other things that led you to that decision to get interested in that? Or is it just kind of a trickle here, trickle there, and then you follow this
Well,
rabbit
I
hole,
think
and soon you're deep?
I think a lot of it was like those little inclinations, like, it's the calving in which our snowstorms are few and far in between, but they
Right.
happen, they're going to happen in the wintertime. So it
Yeah.
was the stuff like that, the hay crops going downhill, looking at the cattle performance. And I think, all those things kind of built up over a few years there. And
Oh, yeah.
then, and this other information starts coming in and you're like, okay, this kind of makes sense, which, I never want to buy anything at face value. I always want to, get the information, maybe fact check it a little bit, which that's maybe not the best term these days, but I want to do my own study on
Right.
it.
I get it. Yes.
And a lot of it is finding people that are doing it. And that's the thing that's so beautiful about the internet today. I mean, there's somebody
Oh.
recording everything they do.
Oh, yeah.
And so, you can kind of get a little bit of proof of concept without actually having to do anything yourself. But I think all those little things were really priming the system. And I was,
Oh, yes. Yeah.
we didn't put out a lot of feed on our main herd, but between the hay, which it costs us a lot of money to put the hay up, and then through the wintertime, we would be putting out a ton of feed every week, basically. When you start hearing about the guys that are like, I'm running 1,000 head of cows in North Dakota and I don't own a tractor and I don't put up hay. How do you do that? Like, if you could do it there,
Right,
surely
yeah.
I can do it.
Surely you can in LA.
Yeah. Which that was one of those things that struck me. And I forget who it was I was listening to that said that first, running that many head up there, with basically no equipment. I'm
Oh,
like,
yeah.
that just seemed, at the time, seemed really far-fetched to me. And of course, this is my first year I've tried to do any stockpiling, which has been a success would be a stretch. I haven't had great success with it so far.
Well, I have to say my stockpiling for the last 3 years, let's see, this 23, 22, 21 were not good. I guess 20 did pretty good,
Yeah.
but we've had dry falls, and it's just we're not having much luck with the way I've been doing
Right.
stockpiling, so I may have to change up what I'm doing to account for dry years.
Well,
Yeah.
so this year I kind of handicapped myself. I wanted to stockpile. Basically, it was our on farm hay meadow. It's about 12 acres, I guess, total. And so I cut it early in the spring, which was a mistake. I wish I hadn't cut it and rolled it, but I did. And then I left it just also. I just let it do whatever it wanted to do. And it's been about 10 days that we've been into that little meadow, and they cherry picked out all the good stuff. And I'm going to come back to it. There's a lot more in there they can clean up, but I've rotated them off to another area, and I'm doing some, I don't guess you'd call it bale grazing. I'm unrolling it, but I'm
Oh,
still
yeah.
moving them every few days, but I'm unrolling them a little bit of hay every couple days. But I really handicapped myself. I wanted to drill in some wheat and ryegrass and other stuff. So I split the farm in half and I planted 30 acres of it. So I've got to make that other 30 last all winter. And,
Oh, yes.
we're going to be fine doing it with hay, but the idea of getting completely away from hay right now, it seems like a long, long off goal. But fortunately, we are still grazing and almost everybody else around us is strictly on hay. So,
Oh, yeah.
there is a grain of truth there in art anyway. So we'll have to see how it goes from there.
Right. Yes. And circling back to the internet and hearing these people and seeing what they're doing because YouTube, podcasts, great resources out there. Did you have any local people that you were able to go visit and see what they're doing?
Well,
Or were you relying upon mainly the internet to bring you the information?
so there's actually was one guy right off the bat. There's a gentleman, it's actually a distant relative of mine, but he was taking care the herd of cows that we bought a few years ago in the wintertime. He was taking care of them for the gentleman that owned them. And he at the time had just got on the Greg Judy bandwagon. And
Yes.
he sold his hay equipment. He was putting up a bunch of poly fence and stuff like that. So I had heard a little bit of it from him, but he's kind of a quiet, reserved guy. So I didn't get a lot. I'd kind of prod a little bit. Hey, what are you doing? Is it doing any good? I just didn't get much. Fast forward to a couple of weeks ago, and this is actually a funny story because, prior to hearing about Greg Judy, I'd never heard of a South Pole cow. I mean, we got
Oh, yeah.
Black Angus, a few Red Angus around, some Herefords, some Brahmas. That's a few Charolais here and there. That's about as diverse as we get. Just recently, I was working on I do a little bit of mechanical work on the side, and I was working on a bulldozer for a guy, changing a starter on it. And he came by the shop to pay me after I got through with it. And he saw my poly reels on the back of my four wheeler. And he's like, "Hey, you strip grazing?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Well, that's cool." He said, "My dad started doing that." Yeah, I forget, in like early to mid 2000s. I'm like, "Really?" I'm like, "Where's your dad? I want to
Oh,
talk to him." He's like, "Well, he just passed recently." I'm like,
yeah.
"Oh man, I just
Uh,
just missed it." He was doing the rotations. He had a few South Pole cows, the whole 9 yards, and just never knew it because everybody, like I said, they're kind of like the other guy. They're a little private, a little reserved, and especially in this area, everybody knows what you're doing. So if you're doing something different, you kind of want to keep it to yourself until you figure it
Oh,
out.
yeah.
I don't have that luxury. I'm on a main highway, so everybody can see what I'm doing, and I get some questions about it at times. But just to know that there was somebody else, so close. I mean, this guy was, straight line shot, maybe 5 miles from it.
Oh,
I
yeah.
never knew, never.
Yeah. Well, a funny story with that about a few years ago, there's a ranch north of us sold. I kept telling my wife, why don't we go buy it? And she says, because we don't have $2.5 million. So I said, well, valid point. But the people bought it and then they've chopped it up.
Yeah.
So it's no longer this nice ranch with so many acres continuous. But one of those areas, and I don't know how big it is, they have poly wire strung up, and it's about 6 miles from me, and I drive by there, and I tell my wife every time we start down, it's on a highway, and we don't go that way very often, but when we do, I'm like, "Oh, I hope they're out there moving cows." She's like, "We're not stopping." I said, "Oh, if they're out there, we are."
Yep. It's fun when you do find somebody that's close to you, it's like you don't even know them from the next person on the street, but you're like instant connection and
Oh, yeah.
everybody seems to be like-minded. Like, everybody that I've met so far, we all talk about the same things and it's really fun. It's fun.
It is, yes. Now circling back to your heifers because we kinda ran back, did a couple other things. We'll come back to the heifers. And if you're out there listening, I hope you've enjoyed this little rabbit trail. How'd the heifers do? And you got the Cyclops in there, and that made a difference. Any other challenges?
Oh yeah. Right off the bat, I had a couple of reels and I didn't have any what I would call like a mainline fence that was
Oh,
energized.
yeah.
I had a little bit of high tensile wire around the perimeter in places, but it by no means was complete. So I was using polyline to make my main divisions and then kind of circling off of them and driving a T post to make a corner. And it was a lot of effort. Which I was committed to it. Hey, I want to try it out. But I
Oh,
figured out
yeah.
pretty quick, like, okay, you got to take a weekend here and there and do some infrastructure upgrades.
Right,
So,
yeah. And you mentioned a T-post for a corner. What are you using for end of a fence or a run now?
so now I hook my reel on, I guess you could call it Greg Judy style, where I wrap the poly wire around the hook and then hang it on the high
Oh,
tensile.
yeah.
That's a great
Yes.
tip. I was trying to use jumpers for a while and they'd get lost or they'd break. It was just a nightmare. And I saw that one day and I was like, that's genius. Like
And
most things
simple.
he does.
Yeah, I cannot find my jumpers ever, and I them and they go in the pickup, and I don't know where they go.
Right. And you buy them
R
like, I can order them online for what, 7, 8 bucks a piece. But when I run out of them, I had to get them at the co-op. The only ones I got are the Gallagher brand. They're like 25, 30 bucks.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, I saw something interesting on Facebook today. I've got a few Terra posts maybe?
Heard of
They're
those.
the posts that goes in, they're about 36 inches tall with a deal to hook on, but I can just set them wherever. I think American Grazing Lands has them. And I've got them. I've got a power post, or it's from Powerflex, that you can hang multiple reels on it. Because when I get out there and I'm fencing and I want to make a paddock smaller, and try and figure out how to hold those up. I've done different things, and those things work great, but they're expensive, and I'd like some more. I saw a post today on Facebook. Today, the guy says he uses a pitchfork, puts it in the ground, and I don't know how he hooks the reel to it. I'm gonna have to play with that and see, because I'm like, a pitchfork that might work.
Yeah. And probably ready available on any farm.
Yes, I mean that's one of those simple solutions. I can't wait to get out there and try it.
One thing I did try out that worked semi decent until I swapped to the style I'm doing now. I was taking, I think it's 2-inch PVC. I would take a standard T post. I would kind of make me a line out where I thought my divisions would be.
Oh yeah.
Drive the T post in, slide the 2-inch PVC over it, and then I was hose clamping either the hook of the reel right onto the hose clamp, or
Oh yeah.
I did another version after that with like a carabiner clip where I would hose clamp it on and then I could just hook the reel
Oh
onto that. And that actually worked decent. I'm not gonna say it was the
yeah.
best because you're still out there pounding posts occasionally and
Right.
it was all right. And the good thing is when you got the PVC set up, you can just pull it off of one T post, go down the line and slide it onto another one. So
Another.
that does
Yeah.
kind of expedite things. Our setup that we've gone to now, so this property is basically kind of a long rectangle. And so I set up, I would call it like a ladder style electric fence. So the perimeter's
Oh yes.
fenced with barbed wire, 5-strand barbed wire, and a couple high tensils. And then about every 10 acres, I put in, some of them are 2 wire, some are 1 wire. I think I've got one that's 3 wire, just high tensile fence on T-posts, and I would make a division in there. I put a gate on each end and a gate in the middle. Just, like the gates are like the aluminum, whatever it is, 12 gauge wire.
Oh, okay.
But
Yeah.
that gives me header so I can hang my reel on there. It's powered from the perimeter fence, and then I can make my divisions from that to the perimeter fence or to the next header fence, I guess you could call it. I really need to come up with a better name for
Oh,
that. So that takes everything, all your poly lines are straight lines. So you've got a reel on one end,
oh, yeah.
just a hook on the other. So it's basically, hang a reel, pull out a few posts, step them in, hook it on, move the heifers, close them back off, and then pull up the one from the previous day and either set it up for the next day or put it on the wheeler. That tremendously, I mean, it saved a lot of time.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I could go, I guess when I started, my moves were taking 45 minutes to maybe an hour. And now, unless I had to do something crazy, I mean, it's like 15 minutes. It's almost too fast. It's almost like you don't spend enough time out there. You kind of feel like you're cheating a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Now, what kind of water system do you have for your cattle?
So the water system is still in development. I've got water at the barn in the shop, and I was kind of radiating out from that with like 1,000 feet of water hose, which I recommend if that's all you have. I don't recommend if you have anything better at all.
Oh, yeah.
The water hoses are a challenge. So a couple months ago, we went from the shop out a couple 1,000 feet down to our south end. So basically, I've just got a water point on the south end that I can reach almost everything that doesn't have a pond in it.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I said, I'm still using the hoses, which I'm not a fan of, but it's baby steps. So every time I get a little
Right. Yeah.
cash, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go buy a few more joints of pipe and kind of try to strategically get to where I can get the most bang for the buck for now. I would
Oh,
love to
yeah.
be able to
Yeah.
just drag that down and punch it into one of those Clausen valves or whatever. But
Oh,
on
yeah.
that point, so the line that I ran out from the shop to that south end, I did put one of those Clausen valves. I think they're every 150 feet, 160 feet. That is so nice. When you need to move a water
Are they?
trough, you just pop it out of there, drag it down, plug it back in. I mean, I dream of the day that the whole place is like that. It's
Oh, yeah. Well, I've got a lease property, and I've just got high tensile down the middle of it. It's a 80, so I just went straight down the middle of with one strand of high tensile, and I feed everything off. And basically, I take the cows and a racetrack around it, and I can just do strips, and it takes me 12 posts, 10 to
Yep.
12, depends on my mood and how far I'm stepping and what I'm stepping through, because some of it's not too bad, some of it's a little bit worse. But my biggest problem with it is water.
Yeah.
And like you said, if I was just stringing the fence, 15 minutes, I could have the front fence, the back fence, and we'd be good to go if water wasn't an issue. What it is, I've got to leave the back fence off
Mhm.
and let them go to water, which at times I'm like, that's fine. And other times I'm like, I've got to do
Right.
better. So then I make an alley. And if I make an alley, then I don't want them to walk on the alley too long. And I move it over. So for that particular property, water is a limiting factor.
Mhm.
And I've thought about a solar pump to pump it out of a pond and lay, what is that,
Oh,
HDPE
yeah, yeah.
pipe. I don't know if I got those layers right, but lay it under my fence so I can water off of it, because it's leased land, so I don't want to do anything permanent because, well, in fact, I've got to contact the guy and see if I can get another lease
Yeah,
on
and
it.
that's really a big struggle, and that's a fight that I'm gonna have to figure out how to take on that challenge pretty quick because everything else around is leased ground. And
Oh, yeah.
our our kinda culture in the area is most of the leased ground is either run conventionally or it's
Mhm.
taken for hay. So, people are
Oh,
really
yeah.
accustomed to kind of a year by year, or maybe every once in a while you'll find like a 3-year lease or something like that. When you start talking about 5 years or, I think I heard Greg Judy talk about like 10-year and lifetime ones, nobody wants to hear any of that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. He's got a lifetime one. My leases are 3, 5, and 10, and then the other property I graze, I don't have a lease. It's just
Yeah.
an interesting agreement.
Understand completely.
So it could end tomorrow. It might continue till the day after, We'll see how it goes. Either people are haying it, they're running set stock on it, conventional, or it's hunting.
Yeah.
And and right now, I have the hard time. I'm working on trying to convince some hunters that, hey, let me graze your land. We can both benefit from this. Interesting enough, I've contacted some of these people with hay meadows, and they're like, you want to do what with my hay meadow? Graze cows? It's a hay meadow. What do you think the hay's going to?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
So one of the only places I have leased at the moment is it's an 80-acre parcel that's close to me that I've been cutting for hay for the last few years.
Yeah.
And, they ran cattle on it decades ago, but the fence is shot. Like they're basically no infrastructure. And I've been working on them. I'm like, and this is something I probably should have mentioned earlier. We actually sold that main herd of cattle out. So all we've got, as far as me and my partner go right now, that the company owns, we've only got these replacement heifers.
Oh, yes.
So I talked to these guys and I'm like, hey, my hay load is going to be trailing down. Like I'm going to sell some for a few years, but I want to move out of the hay business. And they're like,
Right.
okay, maybe we'll find somebody else or whatever. And I'm like, but I would be interested in running cattle on there. And they're like, well, how would that work? Because, you hay it all summer and then we hunt it in the fall. And I'm like, well, why don't you come over one day and look at my south pasture with heifers standing in it and the 40 deer that are out there too. And as long as you don't shoot a
Yes.
cow, you're not bothering me.
Right.
So I
Yeah.
don't have them totally convinced yet. Working on it, but I hope it works because it's a really nice place and it's only a couple minutes away and
Oh, yeah.
that would be handy. But those challenges you were talking about with lease properties, I'm going to have the same ones there. Got to figure out how to tackle that beast.
Yeah, my goal for spring of 2024 is get that water figured out over there. We had this year, well, most of the years have been fine, but 2022 was dry and I ran out of water over
Ooh,
there.
that's
Then
scary.
I couldn't graze it all. And I'm like, I need to clean out those ponds, but then that gets into that lease thing and how much money do I want to put into it? But I've
Struggle.
got to figure out something.
Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
struggle on that property. There is a pond there, but the trees have grown around it. So it's either hire an excavator to come in and clean it out, or I'm like, hey, maybe we can get with the NRCS and punch it well out here.
Oh, yeah.
It's just, there's options out there, but it takes a lot of legwork.
Right. They just don't fall into your lap. And
Nothing comes easy that's
so
worthwhile.
right, exactly right. Yeah. Well, Jake, wonderful conversation, but we need to go ahead and move to our overgrazing section where we take a deeper dive into one of your practices on your farm. And one thing that you had posted about a while back was your shade structure. So tell us how that's worked. Tell us how it came to be.
So that delightful contraption, we call it the Shade Shanty 600 square feet, basically.
Oh, yeah.
Cal, I think that may be one of the single most powerful things that I have put to use on that property.
Oh,
Um,
yes.
so it originated from, I started rotating in the spring. No trouble. The weather's mild. I didn't even think about the freight train of summer slowly lumbering away at me. And the fact
Oh,
that,
yeah.
so I've got a lot of trees on the perimeter of that property, but it's pretty sparse in the middle. And, summer comes and the heat starts cranking up. And I'm looking at these gals out here and I'm like, I got to do something. And I don't want to just turn them loose into the pastures that have, shade access. I'm like, what am I going to do? And I had seen, I think the company is Serrated Shade or something like that.
I think that sounds correct. I've seen some.
Beautiful, beautiful pieces of equipment, way out of my budget. So,
Oh, yeah.
I'm a bit of a tinkerer, and my first idea is like, oh, let's head to the scrap pile and see what we got. So I dug around, found the materials, what I could kind of roughly build, and I got on Amazon and, I was looking at like greenhouse shade cloths and they're really cheap.
Yes.
I forget that one is 20 feet wide and 30 feet long, believe, and it was like less than 50 or maybe $75.
Oh,
So the Shade Shanty is the frame of it is 6-inch square tubing. That came from you've seen the truck stops, the scales for the 18 wheelers, they're cat brand
oh, yes.
scales. Um, I got 2 of those poles that were damaged when somebody hit them. So the frame of it is not straight. It's got a twist in it, but you know what? Those heifers don't care one bit. No. The top part that holds the actual cloth is 2-inch oil filled pipe, which is a little heavy
Oh, yes.
for the purpose, but it was what was on hand. I mean, I think I spent like $150 on this thing. The axle in the back is a 90s model Ford dually axle that I just cut in two, and I think it's about 12 feet wide. And the front is it's just a piece of tubing with a ring cut in the end of it that'll drop on a ball or a pedal hitch or anything like that.
Oh, yeah.
And there's 2 jacks on the front. One came off of a trailer and one came off a hay baler. I mean, it's literally Frankenstein junk. But I drug that thing out for the first time and it's heavy, but I've got a mule side by side, an older one.
Yes.
The mule will pull it. It's probably not good for the belt, but it'll do it.
Oh,
So
yeah. That 2-inch oil-filled pipe's gonna be heavy, and then that
yeah,
tubing.
I don't know exactly what it weighs. It's gonna be in the neighborhood of about 3,000 pounds. My front end loader
Oh,
will
yeah.
pick it up, but it's like you wouldn't want to drive very far with it. It's right there on the limit. So I'm gonna say
Oh,
about
yeah.
3,000 pounds, give or take. But I deployed that thing the first time and it was a hot, sunny day. And of course, those heifers were looking at me from the other end of the paddock and they're like, what in the world is this thing? And of course, the most adventurous couple come up and they kind of check it out. And Cal, I think it took about 15 minutes for the rest of them to pile underneath that thing, and they camped out on it. And I'm like, okay, hey,
Oh,
this is a great success. You know, I've achieved my mission, and it wasn't very expensive. It's easy to move. I didn't think about the other benefits of it. So the next day when I came out to pick, and it just so happened that it was in kind of a low area that there's a lot of, I don't know exactly what it's called. It's a sedge grass. But it's pretty
oh,
rough.
yeah.
And when it gets mature, it's got the little spiky balls on the top for the seed heads. And it's pretty tough stuff.
Oh, yeah.
You know, they'll kind of early in the year, they'll kind of nip at it, but once it's mature, no way. Well, when I came out the next day to move that thing, it was hammered flat underneath that shade structure. And
Yeah.
I mean, there's manure everywhere, there's urine everywhere. And I'm like, hey, this is going to be a weed fighter too.
Oh,
And so, you know, from that point forward, I look at my area that I'm giving them for the day, and I would just pick out the worst 30-foot circle, and that's where I would park the structure. And the interesting thing is, like even now, so the areas that I planted in my cool season grasses, every spot where that shade structure was is the brightest, prettiest green. I mean,
oh,
it's just
imagine
amazing.
so.
So I can't wait. I want to get somebody out with a drone next summer to kind of get an aerial shot. I
Oh,
think
yeah.
it's going to look like a big polka dot map. You know, I think there's just going to be
Oh,
green
yeah.
spots everywhere. The shade structure's been it's been a pretty good tool. I've got a couple more ideas. I'd like to put my mineral feeder on it and stuff like that. Maybe I'll get
Oh,
to
yeah.
this winter, maybe not. I'm not sure. I've got some other things that need to be handled. Having
Yeah.
that ability to put shade anywhere you want it, and for such a, which I know not everybody's going to be in that situation, but such a low amount of money, that was just, that's got to be the highest ROI thing that I've done on that property so far.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And you're getting that fertilization, the manure and urine where you want
Yep.
it. And I hadn't even thought about the trampling effect you could get on it and disturbing that area of land right there. So if you put it on a poor piece or if you got some briars or something,
An
put it on top
interesting
of.
addition to that, the first, so I haven't seen really any native grasses out there, which is to be expected. I mean, I just kind of started doing this, but one of those spots that I started that shade structure off, there's a plant, it's a native, it's called a long spike trident, if I remember correctly, which is a pretty
Oh,
low
okay.
quality forage. but I didn't care because it was native and that was exciting. And I had never seen
Oh,
that
yes.
before out there. And so I think there's going to be some long term benefit to the shade structure. I wish it was
Oh,
bigger.
I
I
suspect
don't
so.
know exactly how, because that one will service about 20 to 25 head of heifers. I'd say probably
Mhm. Yeah.
15 to maybe 20 full grown cows. So, it could be bigger, but if there's a will, there's a way.
Right, yeah. And I assume with your daily moves, you're moving it each day just with the
Yeah.
mule?
Yeah. As long as, there's certain situations where I wouldn't move it. Maybe I'll just leave my back fence from the previous day and then just move their
Oh, yeah.
front fence up. You know, that's really the neat thing about this style of management is like, hey, I need a couple extra minutes. Just give them a little bit more ground. And
I agree. The adaptiveness about it being flexible in the
yeah.
what you're doing, for me with the off the farm job and what I have to do with that tomorrow evening, I'll be at a wrestling
Oh,
match.
fun.
So I don't think they're asking me to participate, which I'm glad of that, but I will be there. So I won't be moving cows tomorrow evening. So, that's the beauty or one of the really nice things. I can still keep them on rotation, but I have some flexibility and plan for that. That's really interesting about the Shade Shanty 600. Sounds like it's working good for you. What if you were doing that again? What would you do different?
I would probably try to lighten it up some. And
Mhm.
And I thought about this when I was building it. I would really like to make it where I could fold it up and be able to
Oh,
transport it
yeah.
down the highway for the thought of those future lease places,
Yes.
which, it'd be a lot more work, but it would be doable. But lighten it
Yeah.
up and make it where I could at least reasonably get it down the highway. It might still end up being 10 or 12 feet wide, but that's pretty acceptable around here as long as you're not going a long way. Like I
Oh,
pull my
yeah.
grain drill down the highway pretty frequently, and it's like 18 feet wide, and it scares the shit out of me all the time. But
Yeah. Yeah. The South Pole Field Day from, I think, 21, I think that was the one in Trenton, Tennessee. And they had some shade structures out there that was a big square tubing. I don't know, 8, 10 inches as I recall. I took pictures. That was very interesting. And they had poles going up and then the pole coming across and the shade could collapse down so they could move it. And then it'd push back up. I took all kinds of pictures of it because I thought I'm gonna go home and build one.
I think if I
Um,
was going to tackle this one again and make it fold, so the drill pipe that's across the top is just running, kind of like a floor joist would be. They're just
oh yeah,
runner. I would probably build those as a hoop that would come up from the axle and be on a pivot. So you could fold them
oh yeah,
together. You probably had to pull the shade cloth off, but you could fold those
oh
poles
yeah.
up.
I see what you mean.
And then when you got ready to deploy it, you could open them up and put that shade structure. And, I think maybe with like some boat winches or something like that, I think it could be done.
Oh
I
yeah,
was kind
yeah.
of in a
And
time
for
crunch, so that's why I opted for just
yeah.
weld it up because I knew I could get this done in like 2 days and get it out there. So
Oh yeah, yeah. And it worked. And for our listeners listening on podcast, we are using hand gestures to describe it. It is available on YouTube if you want to hop over there and see our really elaborate hand gestures, how it's made.
I'm a big hand signal fan. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, I gotta talk with your hands. I don't know how people do
Nope.
without it.
Certainly not.
Well, Jake, moving on from there to our famous 4 questions, same 4 questions we ask of all of our guests. I hope you've studied. Our first question: what's your favorite grazing grass related book or resource?
Well, considering that Charlie Massey kind of kicked me off, highly recommend that one. Now, it's not per se a grazing book or anything like that, but it's a good journey starter. It's a good Kickstarter. Another one that I've just picked up that I haven't finished, and I did not jot down the gentleman's name, but it's Ranching Like a 12-Year-Old. I can't call his name. It's Tom something, but there's some interesting ideas in there that I haven't heard before, and I'm really looking forward to trying some of those out next year. Some different perspectives, different management, and like I said, I'm going to definitely try out some of those tricks that he's got in that.
I've not. I don't know, 6 months ago, I hadn't heard of that book, or even maybe even 3 months ago. But it seems like in the last few months, I've heard of this book, Ranching Like a 12-Year-Old.
Somebody, it
And
may have been the Herd Quitter podcast, interviewed him. The author,
oh,
he's kind
yes.
of a sleeper. Like he's got a few YouTube videos, kind of outline what he talks about in his book, but he doesn't do a lot of interviews and he doesn't have a big social media presence. And
Oh,
I think
yes.
that was where I actually heard about it. And I'm like, well, hey, I hear a good book. I'm always willing to try it out. So
Oh, I'm always
yeah,
game.
absolutely.
I'll have to add that one in. When I first heard it, I thought the title reminds me how not to go broke ranching,
Yeah.
which is a really good book. And I hear that title, I'm like, wait, that's not the same book.
He had a couple of high school girls helping him in the summer, and he was like, "We've got it set up where these 2 girls can move these by themselves." I'm like, "That's
Oh,
efficiency."
yeah. Yes, it
So,
is.
definitely a
Yeah.
good read. I would check it out.
Well, very good. You've given me 2 books that I haven't read, so that's always great. Always more to do. Our second question, what is your favorite tool for the farm?
Well, I actually brought it with me because it never leaves my
Oh, right.
side, and it's not per se exactly a farming tool, but these little jewels right here, this is Knipex. It's a German company. It's Knipex, and this is the Cobra model. But
Oh, the
anybody
Cobra
who
model.
has
Yeah.
ever struggled with channel lock pliers, these are the most amazing things ever created. They're like 35 bucks
Those
on Amazon. I go through a pair about every 3 months. I'll wear them out. I mean, I use them for which my day job, I'm a millwright, so I probably use them a little more than most people would, but still,
oh, yeah.
I was trying to think, I'm like, what is something that I use all the time that nobody's mentioned before? Because everybody's like, the
Oh,
internet or this charger or that foot's post. And I'm
right.
like,
Yeah.
all those things are great, but what do I use every day? And man, when I don't have those pliers, it's just, I gotta have 'em. They're fabulous.
Well, that Knipex brand, however you say it, is so nice. I have a lineman pair of
Oh,
pliers
yeah.
from them. It's my favorite. I didn't even know they made these others. I'm gonna have to look into
They're good. I
that.
wanna send them an email and see if I can get them to make fencing pliers. That would just
Oh,
that'd
yeah.
be the end all for
Yeah.
me. That would be amazing.
Well, I've always been a fan of lineman pliers, and I am just as impressed. In fact, I brought them in one day, and they were in a coat or something. And so next time I was outside, it must have been last spring, as we changed over to spring. I'm outside and I can't find them in the
Oh,
pickup.
yeah.
And I always put them in the door of my pickup, so I know right where they are. I know right where they are right now because if I need them, I need them there. I hunted all over for those things. And I went a couple weeks before I found them under a coat. Yeah, I was about to buy another pair.
I keep it's actually funny, I keep a new pair on standby just for
Oh,
when
yeah.
these finally have had it, I'm ready for a new pair. I'll get out the new ones and then I'll recycle these back to the junk drawer in the kitchen.
Oh, yeah. Sounds like a good
Yep.
program. Our third question, Jake, is what would you tell someone just getting started?
Think the biggest thing for me, there's a lot of good information out there in the world, but make sure you apply it in your context. I hear so many great tips that work fabulous for somebody else's situation, and maybe they will work in mine, maybe they won't. But that's the biggest thing is, be conscious of your own context and use those for stepping stones. I think a lot of us are looking, and I was too. I was looking for a prescription, like, hey, I need to do this, this, and this, and I'll have success. And it's just not out there. That when I really, which I shouldn't say got started. I mean, I've just started this journey, but when I really figured out that I couldn't, replicate somebody else's system in my situation and have the same result, that was what helped the most. You gotta pave
Oh,
your
yeah.
own way, and there's nothing wrong with listening to all the other guys out there, gals too, but just make sure you can put it in your own context.
Yes, you gotta glean what works for you out of it, what you wanna try and use. And I know as a beginner or someone looking at this, you're like, "Just give me the recipe,
Right.
and I'll go bake it." And and while that'll get you so far, it won't get you the whole way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. And Jake, lastly, where can others find out more about you?
Well, I'm not a huge social media guy. I am on Facebook frequently. That's what pretty much everybody uses around here. It's just my name, Jake DeWoody. For some reason, somebody wants to chat, hit me up on there. If you do, put in there like why you're hitting me up, because I have gotten quite a few messages over the last couple years. They're like, sent you a friend request. Why didn't you accept it? I'm like, well, I don't know who you are. Like, give me some info. Why are you contacting me? On the Facebook,
I get that. Yeah.
just Jake DeWoody. I do have a fairly poorly executed YouTube channel that is Terrabineck Creek Farm, and I will send that to you because it's a mouthful.
Oh, yeah, that sounds good. Yeah. And we'll put it in our show notes.
There's not a lot on there. So every year I'll pick a skill that I want to explore a little bit. And last year for me, that was videography. And so I'm like, oh, what am I going to do? Well, I'm doing some crazy stuff. Let's put it on YouTube. Maybe somebody will watch it. So far, like 40 people have watched it. I haven't put much on there recently. I hope to get back to that because it's a lot of fun.
I enjoyed YouTube videos. I've got some up, and I think all the time I'm going to start doing a few more. It just gets to be a time issue
Yeah,
for
it's
me.
a challenge. And to break that algorithm, you've got to be consistent with your videos.
You do.
And it's just,
Yeah.
for a guy that's working a full time, it's like you. I commend you to no end doing this podcast every week. I mean, it's a monumental amount of effort. And
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
I'm certainly appreciative of it. I look forward to it every week.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear that. I tell people all the time, well, first thing I tell them, the host isn't very good, but the guests are. And then I tell them, I started this so I could have these conversations. I just happen to record them and share them with others. I get so much benefit out of this, talking to others on the same type of journey. It just energizes me and keeps me going.
I never was a podcast person. I only vaguely had an idea what they were until I found that Charlie Arnott podcast. And then I'm like,
yeah.
wait a minute, there's people that do podcasts about farming and ranching. I'm like, sign me up. Now I've got, a dozen on there every week, and it's beautiful.
And I find new ones all the time that are, they're on episode 200. Right. And I'm like, where have they been hiding? Yep. I've searched and searched. I found one tonight because Spotify sent out the wrap, and I don't know. I've got my daughter at home she's like, it came in today. You got to look it up. So I looked it up, and I actually had a Spotify wrap for the podcast, which I shared on Instagram. But it was interesting seeing all that information. But in doing so, I found a podcast that I'm like, oh, I need to listen to that. Yep. So I run out of time to listen to everything I want to listen
absolutely.
to. Yeah. Well, Jake, we really appreciate you coming on and sharing with us today.
Well, I enjoyed it. I hope maybe somebody else will enjoy it. That's the same thing I say on my YouTube videos. Like, I had a good time. I hope everybody else does too. Quite a pleasure.
Yeah, I'm sure people will get benefit from it. You're listening to the Grazing Grass Podcast, helping grass farmers learn from grass farmers. And every episode features a grass farmer and their operation. If you've enjoyed today's episode and want to keep the conversation going, visit our community at community.grazinggrass.com. Don't forget to follow and subscribe to the Grazing Grass Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube for past and future episodes. We also welcome guests to share about their own grass farming journey. So if you're interested, fill out the form on grazinggrass.com under the Be Our Guest link. Until next time, keep on grazing grass.